So when you were designing her, were you envisioning the ship as something we could take on to win a battle single-handedly against any previous Federation ship, or established alien ships such as the Romulan Warbird, Dominion ships, etc.? Maybe with the exception of a Borg cube, of course, but we never really got to see it in battle. So what were your take on her abilities in that regard? Do you think she was the toughest ship of the era?
I certainly think that Starfleet probably thought that they had, a cool new vessel with a big advantage. It was a brand new prototype. It was super secret. I'm sure the admirals thought that this was, this was going to maybe shift the advantage in battle if it was needed.
So we've seen a previously purpose-built warship with a Defiant, a vessel that had no labs and no frills. The Prometheus, however, was far larger than Defiant, but again, purpose-built. So what do you think Prometheus was given in terms of science labs, recreational facilities? Do you think it's had a mess hall Voyager style, or was everything still really compressed?
I suspect that for the purposes of a prototype, a lot of those interior spaces were left empty. And one of the things we talked about with the Galaxy class was that a certain number of Galaxy class hulls were left unfinished. They were flyable, but they were left unfinished. Not all of the room modules were beamed in. With something like Prometheus, which had a minimal crew to begin with, I suspect that a lot of internal volume was probably structurally complete, but not filled up with stuff. Okay, think about what do you have on a typical boomer submarine? Okay, it's not all business, but it's a lot of business.
So it's not a one-trick pony, it's not 100% battle, it's still got some science labs, it's still got some explorational ability in it, even if it's not utilized fully.
Oh, sure. Look at the Enterprise D. That was a pretty nice place to live, even when you got into a dust-up with the bad guys. I don't see Starfleet doing anything very, very different. But maybe just the relative proportion of nice crew areas versus places to store armament, fuel, high energy systems. It's probably just a different balance, a different set of priorities for that kind of a ship.
Well, one thing that we noticed in our mission briefing about this ship is what looks like to be armor on either side of the bridge module. We couldn't really work out what it was. It's a cool detail, but what exactly is its function?
Structural integrity field reinforcements.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, and that goes back to the original blueprints. Yeah, the big flat plates with the ribs going through them. Yeah. That's,
there you go, Samuel. You got your answer.
There you go.
So what makes the ship unique to need extra hull reinforcement plates?
It'll probably be taking a lot of hits.
So would you then say that in those areas there'd be sensitive systems, specifically under the heavy-duty armher?
Either that or okay. Now you look at Voyager, and Voyager has a series of short little ribs all over the hull. Those work kind of in conjunction with the defensive shield grid. Okay, it's a lot of the same technology. It's super high energy, making the hull nice and solid and tight against enemy weapons. Okay?
Plus, when they're reattaching and stuff, there's got to be some structural stress there. So maybe it helps with that as well.
Oh yeah, it would definitely help with that. Just from a design standpoint, just from okay, this is a visually interesting flat, or gently curved area that has a number of other little shapes. They all mean something within the context of the ship. Those really help solidify like the entire forward hull.
Well, dare I ask you to quantify it, but could that hull take a torpedo hit and be fine? Could it take a quantum torpedo hit? I mean, do you design it that well?
You mean if the shields go down?
Shields go down, yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, probably.
Cool.
I mean, shields could be pulled in toward the surface. We've seen them as big bubbles. Okay. I think as a battle progresses, as the energy that goes into the shields starts to drain, okay, shields are at 28%, sir. That skin, that protective shield bubble will get tighter and tighter up against the hull. So you want to be able to, protect the ship against things like torpedo hits right up until, the generator goes out.
So the primary impulse engines also look rather redesigned and sleek. We see in the episode that the saucer section is at least very maneuverable. Do you think that when Starfleet designed her, they wanted to push many features up to 11, as it were, such as maneuverability, especially for its size, giving it that potential edge in combat? And then there's got darker areas on the other two warp hulls, as you said, where you think impulse engines would be. Are those also impulse engines, just lacking the blue glow?
I mean, starting with a ship like Voyager, or even a smaller ship like the Runabout. Okay, finding a place to put impulse engines hasn't always been easy. I wanted to kind of put those on as a module that would sit above and below the wing. Those were inspired pretty much by the ones on Voyager, where you have the impulse system on the pylons. In the case of Prometheus, the forward hull impulse engines are on the tips, on the outer tips. The impulse engines for the two engineering hull halves, those are in the trailing edges of the nose areas, for lack of a better term. They're small. They're just a series of little vents, but they are meant to be, the impulse drive.
The saucer, or alpha ship, of course, has the primary bridge module and the crew quarters. The secondary beta ship has the shuttle bay, etc. Now talk us through, in your mind, the roles and capabilities of each part. So let's take the saucer, or the main alpha component, first.
Well, having those small pop-up warp engines, was definitely I would say a bit of a disadvantage in terms of speed. But if you're talking about a battle where they're just going to drive each section 110% power, those little warp sustainer engines could probably, do a pretty decent job. I would say that forward hull, very definitely would be the control center for everything else going on. So the forward hull, it's very capable, for what it's got.
Yeah. So the secondary ship, or beta ship, obviously, as we said, has the shuttle bay, and the other two for torpedo launchers. So, what do you think this section's capabilities are? And I sort of argue that potentially this might be the strongest out of the three, because the top, the saucer has, like, say, the smaller warp engines. It's not got the same power generation capability. It's got the torpedoes, but as does the beta ship, or the tertiary ship, or the gamma ship, has no torpedoes. So I would say it's the most powerful of the three. But what was your take on the middle part, the beta ship?
I actually saw the upper warp hull and the lower warp hull as being two very, very similar ships. If you're swarming an enemy with your three sections, you may not have the luxury to even use the shuttle bay, except maybe in some kind of maybe a big dumb bomb deployment, or getting away from the battle area. The upper warp hull definitely has its own bridge. The lower warp hull kind of has a bridge, but it's upside down.
The third section, or gamma ship part, has a larger deflector dish and a larger amount of phaser strips. So did it have anything specifically that was different about it? Like, what were her capabilities, maybe?
It has the deflector basically because that's where the deflectors are on most Starfleet ships. Okay, so it got lucky, and it got the deflector. The upper warp hull got its own small deflector. A lot of these pieces are for very short duration battle use. Okay, if you need a massive deflector, for hours. Okay, I don't think that's going to happen. In a battle.
And I saw from the episode, there's one of the displays that shows its capabilities. There are landing legs. So does this third part have landing legs as opposed to the other two?
I don't see any reason why something like Prometheus couldn't have its own, touchdown pads, just in case.
Cool. So I want to go back to something that's been previously discussed. We know that Prometheus is equipped with both photon torpedoes and quantums. However, in the episode, we only actually see it fire photon torpedoes from the source's front tubes. We know that quantum torpedoes are actually a different style of torpedo and are a different size, and therefore require a different tube layout to actually fire. Does that mean the source cannot actually fire quantum torpedoes, and that's left to the secondary hull's two tubes? Or perhaps that they've got some advanced tube swapping system where both are implanted and can be swapped out?
From what we heard about quantum torpedoes on DS9, there were smaller devices. Like any good fighter, bomber, or aircraft would have different loadouts. No reason why the Prometheus couldn't have a nice inventory of photon torpedoes, of quantum torpedoes.
It has 150 photons and 150 quantums. You've already said that.
Okay.
Yeah. And six cobalt torpedoes?
Tri-cobalt, yeah.
Tri-cobalt, yeah.
Oh, Oh, that's right. I forgot about those. Yeah.
But
I have no idea how they work, but.
But do you think they're all being launched from the same tubes on both hulls, or do you think it is?
Oh, why not? Okay. Why not? I mean, most of the launcher tubes are magnetic suspension and magnetic propulsion. If you have one torpedo that is essentially 3 feet in diameter, and you have another torpedo that's only 2 feet in diameter, you just you flip a switch on the magnetic suspension, and or it does it automatically.
You can detect what's in there, yeah.
Because we know the Enterprise Z had to have a separate quantum launcher, probably for effect, but it does have a separate torpedo launcher. Do you think this is the first ship to have a dual fire launcher? Which sounds pretty good.
Okay.
Yes. Rick approved.
Yeah. One detail that was never really addressed or seen on the show properly is the detailing on the connection points between the two secondary hull elements. We know that you sketched much of the details, but from looking at the model, we can actually see lots of hatches and things. So are we just to assume that these are turbolift shafts or Jeffries tubes or both, perhaps?
Your main connections would be connecting the two warp cores together.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? When those two aft hulls separate, you get big doors that slam shut and create two separate small warp cores. Okay? During combined operations, the doors are open and it's one big warp core. Okay? You also have corridor connections, Jeffries tube connections, yes. Any EPS conduits, water connections, other fluid connections, air ducts, all of the ship's consumables.
So as for the yellow parts around the sides of the ships, those are clearly connection points. But it doesn't look like they're the same type as we see with the more mechanical connections to Enterprise D, the physical connections, using separation years earlier. So how do these ships actually connect? Is it magnetic or something else? And honestly, the Romulans might have eventually developed something that could demagnetize and decouple the ships. Rick, it's a weakness. I don't know how do you do it, Rick? How do they connect?
Well, we never actually saw them in operation, but the thought was, okay, these are physical grabbers, just like on the D. They're mechanical. Just like docking connectors have been done for centuries. One of the nice things about having the ships combined is, okay, you also have structural integrity field connections between the hulls. Those docking latches would also be, SIF connector points. So you're coursing this SIF energy through the hulls all the time.
So you're saying the Prometheus is truly more than the sum of its parts?
Yeah. I mean, it's a tough ship combined, and it's three little tough ships when they're separated.
Now, we talked about the capabilities of each of the sections. We know that there are 6 warp nacelles, 4 identical ones that split into 2 sets of 2 for the larger engineering hull sections, and then 2 much smaller warp nacelles that articulate out of the saucer. If the ship can reach the blindingly fast top speed of warp 9.99 attached, or combined, what are your thoughts on each piece's independent speed? Can the saucer actually keep up with the other parts with those tiny little nacelles?
You know, if you're talking about straight line flight, probably not. But if you're talking about, you know, whizzing around some bad guys in a much more limited space volume, then I think those 2 little pop-ups, you know, will do just fine. When those things are deployed, okay, that forward hull, its warp core is just racing its brains out to be able to keep that part of the vehicle at warp. Okay, so this thing is just like racing. Okay, you know, like a lithium battery about to explode, and hopefully the battle doesn't rage on at warp, you know, to burn them out
in a chase or something. Yeah. Now, what are your thoughts though on the top speed of each section? Do you think when the engineering hull separates, do you think that it can't reach 9.9 top speed?
The warp scale for me has been a little bit confusing. Some of the things that we saw in dialogue may have gone a bit too high. But if the ship separates at its top speed, okay, those 2 little pop-up sustainers can probably keep that up for maybe, I would guess, maybe a couple of hours. All right.
I'm just saying, if they separate and they have to go to warp to chase something in their individual components, do you think that the 2 engineering hulls are a little bit slower as a result of having to separate?
Oh no, I don't think they'd be slower, but I think their endurance would be at risk.
So it's more, rather than the 4 nacelles generating the juice to keep going at warp, it's more the 4 nacelles give it the well, you know, you can keep going for 10 hours, no issue. It gives that redundancy, that endurance, rather than the boost.
I think it's really a matter of you know, usage of the matter, antimatter. Okay, you're gonna burn through your propellants. You know, the higher you go at warp, and you're also going to stress out the core. You're going to stress out the coils in the nacelles.
That's why cruising speed is cruising speed.
Well, yeah. One of the things we told
yeah, exactly.
You know, ages and ages ago, we told the producers, okay, look, you know, you're not going to be able to sustain super high warp for more than, you know, X number of hours, because you know,
it can't take it.
It's going to burn things out. You know,
in our research, we usually find it's 8 to 12 hours for maximum warp before they have to slow down.
As in stop,
and probably stop.
Yeah.
You know, and do some maintenance. You know, a lot of this stuff, you know, I take from real life, you know, real hardware. Okay, you are not, you know, look at a NASCAR race. Okay, exactly, you know, those things don't zip around without some kind of stopping and fixing and whatever. I think Starfleet is going to have to adhere. You know, it's going to be subject to all the same physical limitations that we have in hardware here.
And they only fix that at the relativity of the 29th century with the temporal impeller drive. They only fix it then. And that is it for the second part of this 3-part extravaganza, guys. You know what's next. It's next week. It's part 3. You're going to tune in. The epic conclusion. Isn't that right, Stuart?
The epic conclusion, I might say, to this awesome ship and this awesome episode of Trekyards. The trifecta, as it were.
So we'll see you then. Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.